Welcome to Faces of South Asia. I'm Isha.
And I'm Sophie.
We welcome you to join us in the Human Trafficking Awareness Summit held right here in Quincy, Massachusetts, in the United States of America in 2016. Human trafficking is a global trade of humans, most commonly for the purpose of sexual slavery, forced labor, mostly fueled by poverty, gender discrimination, and runaway individuals. This may also include forced marriages and child marriages. Human trafficking has been reported in all 50 states, including Washington, D.C., and U.S. territories. FBI estimates about 100,000 to 300,000 are trafficked here in America today. 17,000 to 18,000 are trafficked right here in New England, and Massachusetts being their prime destination. Many victims are not runaways or abandoned, but are from good families who are coerced by clever traffickers. Human trafficking is a $33 billion industry, which ranks second to the drug industry today. Human trafficking is today's modern-day slavery. Join me in the awareness and the action taken by U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Mr. Peter L. DiMaggio. His insights are priceless. Join me in the tireless action and vigilance of the Abolitionist Network, Director SARAH Dunham. Join me in understanding the slavery behind consumer products in the Free Trade Campaign by Alexandra Carroll. Join me in the incredible service provided by the Freedom Clinic of Mass General Hospital and the doctors. Join me to understand the incredible service by Amira, Executive Director Stephanie Clark. Join me in thanking the play Body and Soul. Join me in thanking Allison Cruz, who works with real kids. And thank you, a special thanks to the Rivers for hosting the Trafficking Summit in Quincy, Massachusetts, and Mayor Thomas Koch. Join me in the tireless action and vigilance of the Abolitionist Network, Director SARAH Dunham.
Thank you. So, my name is Sarah. I was Sarah Durfee, now I'm Sarah Dunham. I just got married 2 months ago, so that's exciting, new chapter of life. And I am the coordinator of the Massachusetts Coalition to End Human Trafficking, as well as the program director of the Abolitionist Network, which is a program of the Emmanuel Gospel Center. And I'll just go to this real quick. This is sort of a little bit about what we do. The coalition is really trying to create a network across the state of who's doing what against human trafficking, how do we better work together and share ideas and collaborate on initiatives. And then the Abolitionist Network is focusing especially on the churches. How do we equip faith communities and churches to better understand what's happening and how to engage and how to respond safely and effectively if they do encounter a situation of trafficking. The church might be where a victim of human trafficking goes to get help. It might seem like a safer place to duck into than the police station, right? So my kind of overall passion is networking and helping people work together rather than in separate little silos around the area. So I'm really excited to be here today. We're gonna talk a little bit about a little bit about human trafficking, although I think most of you know what it is and what it looks like even here locally. And then kind of unpacking the systems of trafficking. How does this happen? What are the root causes? And where are the effective places that we can really break in and end this? And then I'll touch a little bit on resources for response, but I know other speakers today are going to be kind of expounding on some of those resources. So, human trafficking, anybody want to just throw out a definition or a word or phrase that you think of when you hear human trafficking? Slavery. Yeah.
Sexual exploitation.
Yeah, sexual exploitation. Yeah. There's a lot of, it's sort of an umbrella term, right? So this is the U.S. Department of State kind of lumps it all together in this one paragraph, but recruiting, harboring, transporting, providing, obtaining a person for compelled labor or commercial sex acts through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. And it's important to note that it doesn't have to be, like transporting is one of the options. It doesn't have to be transporting. I think that's something that when we hear trafficking, we often think that means moving from one place to another, across a border or something, but it definitely doesn't have to be. And then force, fraud, or coercion, what do those words mean? Like, there's a lot of nuance in all those. Force is pretty obvious. Fraud, lies, manipulation, but coercion is a tricky term, but how do we prove that someone was coerced into something? And another point to make, if you're under 18 years old, then you don't have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. If you're being sold for sex, it's automatically considered human trafficking in our state. So where do we see it? All over the place, right? But I just want to point out these two pictures here. The top one is a child picking cotton in Uzbekistan. I think it's important to talk about where people are being trafficked right here in our state, but also the fact that we are purchasing goods, we're purchasing our clothing, our food that comes from areas where there's child labor and trafficking. And so this cotton that these children are picking then goes and eventually becomes the sweater that's sold at the department store here in Boston or in Quincy. And so that's another really significant area of impact that we all have individually, right? How do we spend our money? And then Backpage.com, online trafficking, selling girls, boys, men, women. There's a lot of that goes on around our state. And also here, nannies, domestic workers, massage parlors, body works places, and then just kind of the brothels, like houses of where women are staying and men are going in and out. That also happens in our community. It just might look, it hides more so than in some of the areas around the world that are considered red light districts. We don't really have that any longer, but it's definitely all around us. So this is an old map, but just kind of showing all over the country different cases of trafficking. And I'm just going to put up a couple local pictures, but this gentleman's club, strip club down in Rhode Island is right on the highway. You pass by it, whenever you're driving down, and it's bright pink. Like, they're not trying to hide, right, at all. So it kind of is telling about our culture that this is just right out there, and called Cheaters Gentlemen's Club, sort of oxymoron. And there was a young girl that was found here, and it actually wasn't the first underage dancer that was found there, but sadly there weren't a lot of people advocating for the other girls that were found. But this girl had people that were saying, where is she, what's going on? And they were able to kind of get to the bottom of some of the corruption and get this club closed down. I don't know, Peter might know if I think that it got sold and maybe is up and going again. But there was a lot of corruption to keep this going, and underage girls being trafficked down from Boston into this strip club in Rhode Island. Motels, there's a lot of exploitation that happens because so much is online. The woman is there in a hotel room, and then the guys just know where to meet her, and the buyers come in and find her in the hotel room, and just so many guys come through in a night. And the trafficker, the pimp might be somewhere off in another state even. And this girl is kind of so under his control that she's, she's gonna work for him and make money. And now so much is happening on credit cards and prepaid credit cards that she doesn't even have the cash in her hand to even run with it. It's all just going right into the trafficker's bank. So that's an added challenge. And high schools, our kids are vulnerable. We'll hear more about that later. There's so much going on in our schools that we just don't realize. I did a few presentations at English Public High School in Boston, and I'm sure similar situations here in Quincy, but the kids knew people. There's 9th graders. They were like, "Oh, my friend has made some money selling sex," but it's not really that bad, is it? Like they don't see the damage that it's doing to themselves and in our communities, and the risk of getting violently beat up, even killed in that world. So, and then I was talking about just the houses. It can just be happening in an apartment that you might not consider being anything unusual. And then the last one is social media. There's a lot of recruitment that happens on social media, and traffickers or recruiters that are working for the traffickers set up these fake profiles and pretend to be a 9th grader moving into Quincy and going to the public high school, and hey, I'm gonna go to school with you this fall, in September. Can you introduce me to your friends? Want to meet people, and then slowly kind of convince them to meet up, or the tactic of they're not trying to pretend they're a 9th grader, they're an adult, but they're saying, "You're so beautiful, you could totally be a model. I want to, come and take some pictures, you can make all this money." And what 13-year-old doesn't want to be told she's beautiful and could be a model, right? And it's really attractive, and so it's definitely a challenging issue. This was one article I found in Quincy. I think Peter's going to be sharing more about local cases, but there were I think 5 people that were arrested, and this was a couple years ago. But they were actually smuggling women from various Asian countries. They were coming into South Station in Boston and then kind of brought out to all these different areas around Boston, including Quincy, to work in the massage parlors and basically for sex trafficking, prostitution. So the system of trafficking, I'm going to break this down a little bit, but there's so many layers to this, right? So we can't just pick one thing and say, okay, here's the solution. So I'm going to kind of talk through this and see how there's a role for everybody to play in helping to break this down. But first, kind of step back a little bit, and what does it mean to look at something systemically? I don't know if you're familiar with systems thinking, kind of the school of thought, but we have at the Emmanuel Gospel Center, we have an example. What's the difference between a cat and a toaster? So if I had a toaster that was broken and I gave that to the mayor, do you know would you be able to fix the toaster? How would you fix a toaster?
I would buy a new one.
You buy it. Yeah, you're not that attached to the toaster. You could just buy a new one. If somebody wanted to, maybe take it apart, look at what's going on, clean it out. But if your cat is sick, if you had a sick cat, how would you fix it?
Bring it to the doctor.
Yeah, bring it to a vet. You wouldn't just throw it out, probably, right? So what's the difference between a cat and a toaster? A difference.
Yeah, they're alive. One.
Cat hair. What was it?
The cat's alive.
The cat's alive. Yeah, the cat's alive. There's a relationship with the cat that's different than with the toaster. There's going to be a different way of fixing the problem, right? And you can't just take pieces apart and put them back together with a cat, because there's blood flowing and all these interconnected systems in the cat that impact each other, and it's living and it could die in a different way than a toaster breaks down. So what does that have to do with human trafficking? Well, when we are dealing with people, we're dealing with a living system. And when we're dealing with churches, when we're dealing with schools, when we're dealing with cities, it's a living system. And there's all of these different pieces that interconnect. And when you change one thing over here, it's going to impact something completely, you might think, unrelated, but it actually is related on the other side of the system. And so it's complicated, right? And you have to really be aware of how things you do can actually have unintended negative consequences. That's one of the really major lessons. And so with trafficking, it's important that we all are listening to one another and working together and listening for when we're actually doing something and we realize, oh wait, this is actually causing this other problem going on over here. Or not, it might not be causing it, but it's making something worse. So when we're talking about the drug epidemic, or when we're talking about mass incarceration, or we're talking about just issues of racism, sexism in our communities, it's really important to be aware that all of this interconnects. So give a face to this. Tani is a young woman in Boston who is a really courageous survivor leader. And her story, she was in the foster care system in the greater Boston area. And so her parents, of course, were not able to take care of her, so she was placed in foster care. She was moved from family to family because there constantly were issues in the different families she was placed in. And then when she was 14 years old, she met this guy that treated her like a princess, and he was buying her all these amazing things, and ended up eventually telling her that she needed to go work on the streets and make money and pay him back. And he started pimping her out. And it took her years to get out of that situation and to get the resources she needed. And one of the things that she often says is, I had support from 9 to 5 with my caseworker, but then after 5 o'clock, when I really needed somebody there was nobody there. And except for her pimp, was ready to receive her back, was ready to talk to her. But of course, for really broken reasons. So how do we as a community really support people in that space? And I think we've gotten much better across the area in coming alongside people more holistically, which is really good. So Tani's story, I think, really helps we can understand some of the systemic issues of her story. And when I think of the system, it all starts with a broken relationship or broken systems in place that we're supposed to be supporting Tani, right? And so, I just shared that her family was broken. She was placed into foster care, but there was abuse happening within the foster care system, and So, so you see it just kind of falling through the cracks in those relationships. And it leads, so there's lots of different forms of brokenness. War, natural disasters can break down a system, right, and break down a community, and then people are vulnerable. Child abuse, whether it's physical or verbal, emotional, and all sorts of poverty and economic, disparity. And it can even be messages in the media that are saying that you have to look a certain way, and a young girl just feels like she can't ever match up to that, and then she's vulnerable. So it's important to point out that the victim comes from this story of brokenness, but also the trafficker comes from a story of brokenness. And that's a story we don't necessarily think about all that often. How does a pimp become a pimp? What's his path into that? Probably doesn't just wake up one day saying, hey, I think I'm gonna start selling girls. So that's something I've been working to kind of unpack and listen to some of the stories, but often it's in the family. His dad or his uncle was a pimp and kind of teaches him from a young age to follow suit. Or he's a drug trafficker and then realizes he can make a lot more money selling girls, and kind of shifts over to doing that. One of my friends who's a survivor, her pimp was, his mom was a 13-year-old who was being trafficked. And he was left with his grandfather, who was an alcoholic, who was not, watching him and caring for him at all. And when his grandfather passed away when he was around 12, his dad showed up in his fancy car and fancy clothes and was like, come on, son. And that's his story into this life. It doesn't make it okay, right? But it just helps us try to unpack how do we prevent that. And then there's a few stories. There's some of the brokenness. Then there's the demand side. Who's buying? And the buyer also comes from a story of brokenness, and often, not always, but often has a story of child sexual abuse as a young boy from a close family member or from friends and peers, unwanted sexual experiences that they're very hesitant to call abuse. Even men who are licensed counselors and helping other people. There's this one story I'm thinking of who he's helping other people through their stories of abuse, but said, no, I was never abused. And then finally realized he actually had experienced abuse. But it's not an easy thing to admit to yourself and to work through and heal from. And especially for men, for boys, it's not something that you can't be a victim as a man in our culture, really. And that's changing, thankfully, but it's a really challenging issue. And so that leads to pornography addictions, leads to wanting it in real life. That's not always the pattern, but often. And so how do we stop this? Also, there's the demand for trafficking goods, labor trafficking that goes into the stuff we buy. So fair trade, various forms of fair trade, and Equal Exchange is a company that does a lot of fair trade goods in our area. It seems different, right? But it actually is all related. So trafficking continues. We try to intervene with aftercare, with arresting. There's often recidivism, going back into the life of brokenness. How do we really pull people out into restored relationships, restored community, healthy community and systems? So prevention is one of those key places, and I think that's something that a lot of us in the room are involved with in various ways. And then, so this is Frederick Douglass quote, "It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men and women." It's not easy to build strong kids, but it's easier. It's hard the healing process is so challenging. But we all are broken in some way, right? So we all are in a journey of healing, but there's a lot of prevention that can be done. Another area is in the intervention. How do we recognize what's going on? How do we step in and intervene? So this question, does your agency or organization know how to safely intervene? And that's a training that I'm developing, like I said, within the church community, and I know Peter has a lot of resources as well in the context of various social services and agencies. This is just to think about, for the trafficker, for the buyer, what's motivating them is profit. Often, the traffickers, what's motivating them is profit. For the buyer, what's motivating them is kind of meeting this need that they have, and the brokenness of that, and broken sexuality that's going on. And right now, it's a pretty low risk of getting caught and a pretty low cost if you are caught, especially as a pimp. It's really challenging to prosecute. And so it's making a lot of money, there's a low risk of getting caught and a low cost, so it's worth it, right? But if we can shift that dynamic in our communities to a high risk of getting caught and a high cost if they are caught, that analysis shifts a little bit, and I think that there would be people that would realize this isn't worth it. I'm going to lose my job, my career, I'm going to lose my life, and it's not going to be worth it for me to do this. So there's some initiatives going on in across Massachusetts right now to really take a stand if anybody I think the mayor's office in Boston, and I think the governor recently as well of our state made a declaration, if anybody is caught purchasing sex, they are going to be under investigation and could lose their job in this city or state government. So that puts out a message, right, to our community. So how do we respond if you encounter a victim? There's a lot of different resources that victim might need, so it's important to have those on hand and readily available. And so we'll be sharing more of those. And actually, I think in your packets there's a sheet that's filled out with local resources. But you can localize it even further. Who in your circle would you refer to, and get to know these people if you don't know them already, so that you can easily pick up the phone and say, I need help, this person needs help, and you've already built that relationship. And it's important to understand trauma. This could be a whole training in and of itself, but everyone within the system of human trafficking are in some sort of trauma, and there's, I think, just here it leads to physical, psychological, and relational damage. And it's really challenging to overcome that, and it takes time. And so you might be encountering somebody who's a victim of trafficking, but they're not behaving the way you would think they're going to behave, right? They're being difficult. They're not telling the story accurately. Be patient, be generous with them, be gracious with them, because it definitely impacts us in ways that it's really hard to unpack and heal from. So the last point I want to make is that it takes all of us to address this, and I just kind of, government, services, community members, we all have a part to play in bringing this to an end. And so every place that you go, you might be encountering this, you might be able to prevent it. Just changing our language, the way we speak about pimps and hoes, and just the cultural norms that have come into our media and our young people's culture perpetuating this, honestly. And so how do we help shape that, change that, and really work together, right? We need to work together and listen to each other and talk across the system. And I'm so thankful for this group here today, and just hopefully we can, even those that are right here in this room, if we can work together and listen to each other, I think we can really come up with some solutions of how to address this here in Quincy and across Massachusetts, and really not just help a few people out of the system, but really break it down. And so I'm really excited for that and hopeful, and just recognizing that we are, we're one little piece of a mosaic. If you think of a mosaic, one little piece of pottery isn't the whole picture, right? So we all are a different piece, and we personally have an impact. It's not just our agency or our organization, and I think that's really important to remember. Personally, you have family members you can talk to, you have buying power, and yeah, we all can make a difference. So the hotline number you probably already have, but if not, put that in your phone, 1-888-373-7888. That's 24/7, a number you can call to report or to ask questions and get resources. So thank you so much.
Beliefs of human trafficking in a faraway land is really not true, because it's right here in New England, in Massachusetts, in United States of America. We thank you to join us in this difficult, heartbreaking human trafficking awareness, action and solution summit in 2016. We hope that we can make a difference. Join us in our campaign. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Isha.
And I'm Sophie.